What's up everybody, hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our channel sponsors International MTG on TCG Player, as well as Martin from the Hobby Horse. I'd also like to shout out Mythic Tools, the official live counter app of the channel. This is by far the best live counter app available for tracking all your commander games and stats either by yourself or with your favorite playgroup. Available on both iOS and Android. On this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta, we'll bring you another fun game we filmed down at the Hobby Horse. This week's matchup features Patrick playing his favorite All About Bears deck, being led by Ayula, Queen Among Bears, Ryan playing his Everything Bagel deck, featuring the Precon Commander Omo, Queen of Vesuza, Foggirl playing his Party in the Undercity deck, using Safana, Calimport, Cutthroat, and Feywild Visitor as his commander, and Foil playing his Oops All Flyers deck, using his commander Errant and Giada from New Capenna. Now that we have our fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Foil plays a Plants, then pays 1 for the second turn 1 Sol Ring of the season. Patrick then plays a Snow-Covered Forest, while Ryan plays a Dryad Arbor, and Fog plays a basic Swamp. Foil draws for turn and then pays 3 for a Veer and Wingmare, before Patrick plays a second Snow-Covered Forest, casting his commander Ayula. Ryan plays a Forest for turn before paying 2 for a Leaf Crowned Visionary. Fog plays an island for turn before passing to Foil, who misses another land drop, before paying 3 for Kinjali's Sunwing. Patrick draws for turn, paying 2 to cast a Balduvian Bears. This then puts 2 +1/+1 counters on his commander, Ryan, who plays an Urza's Workshop for turn. This then has him tapping out and casting his commander Omo, which then has him putting an everything counter on one of his creatures as well as one of his lands. Fog plays an island for turn and then pays 3 to cast his commander Safana, Calimport, Cutthroat. Foil draws for turn and misses another land drop before he then goes to combat, swinging both of his creatures over Patrick for 4 damage. Patrick then draws for turn, missing his own land drop before discarding down to hand size. Ryan plays a second Forest for turn before paying 3 in order to cast an Explore, which has him drawing an additional card but not dropping in another land. He then goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Foil, which has him dropping in 2 more everything counters on 2 of his permanents. Fog plays a Swamp for turn and then taps out in order to cast his background, Feywild Visitor. He then goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Foil, who can't block, which then has him creating a Fairy Dragon token once he's dealt damage. Foil misses another land drop and then goes to combat, swinging one of his creatures over at Fog, which swings another one over to Patrick. Both creatures then deal damage and he discards down to hand size. Patrick draws for turn and somehow misses another land drop before he then discards down to hand size and passes turn. Ryan draws. He then pays 4 in order to cast Dwinin, Guiltleaf Dayan. He then swings his commander over at Fog, who takes the damage and has him gaining 2 more everything counters. Fog plays an island for turn and then pays 4 in order to cast a Passageway Seer, which then has him gaining the initiative. This then has him going into his library to get a basic land to put into his hand, before he then goes to combat, once again swinging his commander over at Foil. This then has Fog creating a second Fairy Dragon token, before he then goes to his instep, putting a 1/1 counter on his Passageway Seer, as well as getting a treasure token from his commander's ability. Foil draws and finally gets a second land, before he then goes to combat, swinging both of his creatures over at Ryan for 4 damage. Patrick draws and then misses a third land drop before discarding down to hand size. Ryan draws for turn and then goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Fog while he swings his other creature over at Patrick. This then has him gaining 2 life before Patrick and Fog both block the creatures coming at him, and in response, Patrick casts a Blossoming Defense in order to protect his commander. Ryan then gets 2 more everything counters while his creature goes to the graveyard. On his upkeep, Fog decides to scry 2 cards, which has him keeping 1 card on top of his library while he bottoms the other. He then draws for turn before playing another Swamp. Fog then pays 4 in order to cast an Aura Corker Sneak, which has him going into the third part of the Undercity, creating a treasure token. He then goes to combat, once again hitting Foil with his commander, which has him creating another Fairy Dragon token. Fog then goes to his instep, putting another counter on his Passageway Seer and getting another treasure token. Foil draws and plays an Evolving Wilds for turn before he then pays 3 for a Midnight Clock. He then cracks his Evolving Wilds to go get an island from his library before passing his turn to Patrick, who misses another land drop before he passes his turn to Ryan. Ryan then plays an island for turn before paying 5 to cast a Collective Restraint. On his instep, Fog pays 5 and casts an Illusionist Stratagram. This then has him drawing a card and exiling 2 of his creatures. Both of his creatures then come back into play and has him going into the Undercity 2 more times. This then has him first creating a 4/1 skeleton token before he then reveals the top 10 cards of his library. After revealing his cards, he chooses to put into play a Nadir's Nightblade with 3 +1/+1 counters, before he then shuffles the remaining cards back into his library before he goes into his upkeep, venturing back into the Undercity. This then has him going to get a basic swamp from his library to put to hand, and in response, Foil casts a Brainstorm. This then has him drawing 3 cards and putting 2 cards back on top of his library before Fog starts his turn. Fog then plays a swamp for turn before he pays 4 to cast an Agent of the Iron Throne, and then an additional 2 for a Disciple of Gristlebrand. Fog then goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Foil once again while he swings his Rogue Bird over at Patrick. Foil then decides to double block while Patrick takes his damage. This then has Fog's commander go into the command zone while he creates another Fairy Dragon token. He then ends his turn putting a counter on his Passageway Seer while Foil adds a clock counter and draws for turn. He then pays 5 in order to cast a Time Wipe, choosing to bounce his creature back to his hand before destroying the rest of the board. In response, Fog chooses to sack one of his creatures in order to gain 4 life, before the rest of the board then gets wiped, which has each of his opponents losing 4 life. Fog then gains an additional 4 life and Foil passes to Patrick. Patrick finally hits the 3rd land drop before he then pays 2 in order to cast a Sylvan Anthem. Ryan draws for turn and then pays 3 for a Gatebreaker Ram. On his upkeep, Fog goes into the next part of the Undercity, which has him scrying 2 cards to the bottom of his library. He then draws for turn and plays a basic island. He then pays 5 in order to recast his commander a second time, which then has him creating 3 treasure tokens on his end step. Foil draws for turn and then discards down to hand size, passing his turn to Patrick. Patrick just draws and then passes his turn to Ryan, who plays a Tyrite Sanctum as his land for turn. He then pays to recast his commander Omo, which has him getting 2 everything counters when it comes into play. He then goes to combat, swinging his giant Ibex over at Fog, who just takes the damage, which gives Ryan the initiative. Ryan then goes into his library to get a basic land to put into his hand while Fog draws for turn. He then plays an Evolving Wilds as his land for turn. Fog then pays 4 and casts a Trailblazer's Torch, which then once again has him gaining the initiative and going to the next part of the Undercity, goading Ryan's Ibex. Fog then uses 1 treasure to help him cast a Skyclave Plunder, which has each of his opponents losing 1 life. Fog then looks at the top 4 cards of his library, putting 3 of them into his hand while he puts the other one on the bottom of his library. He then goes to combat, this time hitting Patrick with his commander, which has him creating a Fairy Dragon token. Fog then cracks his Evolving Wilds to go get a basic land before going to his end step, creating 3 more treasure tokens. On his end step, Foil pays to flash his commander Errant and Giada. He then goes to his upkeep, which has his Midnight Clock going off, which then has him taking his graveyard in his hand, shuffling it into his library, and then drawing a fresh 7 cards. He then uses his Floating Clock mana in order to cast an Opt, which has him scrying 1 card, keeping it on top before drawing it. He then draws for turn before playing a Plains. Foil then casts a discounted Winged Words, which has him drawing 2 more cards. He then also casts a pair of Swiftfoot Boots before paying to equip into his commander. Patrick draws for turn and then pays 4 to cast a Spirit of the Alder Guard. This then has him going into his library to get a Snow Forest to put into his hand before he then scries 1 card, keeping it on top of his library. Ryan draws for turn and then pays to cast Persistent Petitioners before also casting his own pair of Swiftfoot Boots. Ryan then goes to combat, swinging his goaded Ibex over at Foil while he swings his commander over at Patrick. Foil then takes his damage while Patrick blocks and Ryan gets 2 more everything counters. On his upkeep, Fog goes into the next part of the Undercity, drawing a card before he then draws for turn. He then plays another swamp before paying 3 for Imoen Mystic Trickster. He then swings his commander over at Patrick once again, which has him creating another Fairy Dragon token. This then has Fog going to his end step and creating 3 more treasures off his commander before he then draws 2 cards off Imoen. Foil draws and then pays 3 to cast Linvala's Shield of the Sea Gate, before also paying another 3 to cast Maul of the Skyclaves. He then attaches the Maul to Linvala before playing a Plains as his land for turn. Patrick draws for turn and then pays 2 to cast 8 fucking bears! This then has him getting 2 Scry triggers, which has him putting both of his cards on the bottom of his library. He then finally plays a Snow-Covered Forest for turn before passing his turn to Ryan, who plays another island. Ryan then declares he's going to combat, and in response, Fog casts an Alchemist Retrieval to bounce his commander back to his hand. But in response, Ryan casts an offer you can't refuse to target the spell, and in response to this, Fog casts you come to a river in order to bounce the Collective Restraint back to his hand. Ryan then flashes in a Spell Stutter Sprite, which has him countering the spell unless Fog pays 3 mana. Fog then pays it through, which has Ryan's spell getting counter and his enchantment getting bounced back to his hand. Fog also then creates 2 treasure tokens off the offer you can't refuse before Ryan goes to combat, swinging his Ibex over at Fog. Fog decides to just take the damage, which has Ryan once again gaining the initiative and choosing to scry 2 cards. He then scries 2 cards at the bottom of his library before he casts an Elvish Mystic. He then casts a Sylvan Library and passes his turn to Fog, who plays a Swamp for turn. He then goes to combat, swinging both of his Fairy Dragons over at Ryan, which has him once again completing the Undercity. Fog then reveals the top 10 cards of his library, this time choosing to put to play an Emrakul's Messenger. He then shuffles the rest of the cards back into his library before paying 3 to cast a Blood Pact. This then has him drawing 2 cards, losing 2 life, and creating an Eldrazi Scion token. Fog then also pays to cast a Venerated Stormsinger before going to his end step, creating 3 more treasure tokens and drawing 2 more cards. Foil draws for turn before casting a Fact or Fiction, revealing the top 5 cards of his library and choosing Fog. After revealing the top 5 cards of his library, Fog gives him the classic 5-0 piles. This then has Foil choosing to pick the pile with 5 cards. Foil then plays an Evolving Wilds for turn before going to combat, swinging Lavala over at Fog, who takes the damage, giving Foil the initiative. Foil then goes into his library to get a basic land to put into his hand, and while he's at it, he decides to shortcut things by cracking his Evolving Wilds to go get a land to put into play. Patrick draws for turn and then casts a Beast Whisperer, which once again has him scrying 2 cards both to the bottom of his library. On his upkeep, Ryan uses his Sylvan Library, which has him choosing to keep all the cards, losing 8 life. He then plays an Urza's Cave before paying 4 to recast his Collective Restraint. He then casts an Adaptive Automaton, choosing Elves as it enters play before going to combat, swinging his commander over at Foil while he swings his Ibex over at Patrick. Foil and Patrick both block, while Ryan gets 2 everything counters before Patrick and Ryan's creatures both trade. Then on his end step, Fog casts a Tragic Slip in order to destroy Ryan's commander. Fog then plays another island for turn before going to combat, swinging both his Fairy Dragons over at Foil. Foil then blocks one of the dragons, giving Fog the initiative back, but because one of the dragons died, each of his opponents then lose a life while he gains a life. Fog then goes into his library to get a basic land to put into his hand before paying 2 in order to cast a Stonework Pack Beast. After which he goes to his end step, creating 3 more treasure tokens, drawing 2 more cards, and creating another Eldrazi spawn. Foil draws for turn, then plays another island before once again swinging Lavala over at Fog. Fog then responds by casting a Final Flourish, kicking it by sacking his Fairy Dragon token, which has each of his opponents losing 2 life while he gains a life. This then has him killing Linvala before he passes his turn to Patrick, who draws and then pays to cast his commander a second time. This then has Patrick scrying 2 times, the first time putting it on the bottom of his library before he then draws the second time off of his Beast Whisperer. It's at this moment Fog realizes he definitely has enough sack fodder in order to take the table out by draining their life totals, so everyone decides to just scoop the game up to Fog. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe in order to see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.